We have the head coach of the Winnipeg Jets, Paul Maurice, joining us. It has been a very unique year, obviously, in Winnipeg. Jets are very much in the playoff fight. And, there's a contract extension to talk about. Paul, welcome to the show. Thanks for doing this, man.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course.
Paul, you've been doing this long enough on the coaching side. You know, normally going into the final year of a deal, if nothing happens before the year, it's fairly common for something to happen after the year. Were you honestly a little surprised it came together during the year?
No, not at all. So that's a function of my relationship with, Kevin and Mark. We talked about it in the summer. There wasn't, and we all agreed that this is what we wanted to have happen going forward. And then as you guys saw, we had a whole host of things happen right from day one with Dustin goes, and then it was just an absolute string of situations that were a far higher priority because I knew I wasn't going anywhere. They knew that I would be their coach, and there really wasn't any urgency. So that's truly, it's not my first year, right? It's not my first contract. We all understood it. This was a back burner thing. I wasn't really worried about it. I truly didn't think about it a whole heck of a lot. It was going to get done. Things quieted down around the All-Star break, and that bought a little time. It's the fourth contract I've done with Kevin, and honestly, the entire negotiation process combined has been about 10 minutes, in truth. Like, they know what the market is. I know what the market is. They're really fair. I'm really happy to be here. So this is what we'd like to offer you. We shook hands. I said thanks, and away we went.
We sit out here, and we've talked already about 7 different teams changing their coaches, and I understand why some people were a little bit confused on the timing. But based on what you just said, there was never a time where you wondered if your future would be in Winnipeg?
No, it never changed. So at the end of the day, what I want for the Winnipeg Jets is for them to have the right guy behind the bench. You want to feel like you're part of that solution, part of working going forward. So if anything had changed, it might have been in my mind. Like if I thought that I had lost the room or we weren't going in the right direction, and maybe it'd go back and say, hey, fellas, why don't we revisit this at the end of the year, find out what's best for all of us. And that never happened. So it was really not the standard, typical negotiation process. It just wasn't. We had all agreed in the summer that this was going to happen, and when it happened didn't matter to me.
Right. So you never needed the vote of confidence. You don't feel like this needed the vote of confidence. You were comfortable all along.
No. And the other thing is I got a pretty good grasp on the work that's being done, whether we're achieving what we should, whether we're behind it. And the truth is, I care about Mark Chipman and Kevin. I care about the Winnipeg Jets. It's a great story. It's a great idea. This kind of small market Canadian team that the fans lost their team and they love it. It's right on all these different levels. I want to be a part of it going forward, but I'd have been the first to say, hey, fellas, I'm not the right guy here for you. After a bunch of years in the league, you kind of know it. You know it when it's not working. We're so young here, and there's so much ground still to cover that I never felt that.
Paul Maurice, head coach of the Jets here on Tim and Sid. Paul, your first year as an NHL head coach, you were 28 years old.
Right.
I am sure you have learned something about this profession in all of the subsequent years. What have you learned about being a coach in this league in a year as unique as this one?
That's a question that I'm asking myself. So I had absolutely no business being in the National Hockey League at 28. I was aware of how far off. I had 2 years as a head coach in major junior hockey, and the next year I'm behind an NHL bench at 28. I was way behind it, and my general manager knew it too. Like, we talked about the fact that the team wasn't very good. I wasn't going to be any good, but we were just going to try to learn and grow together. And then so much has changed. Like, the players are different. The game is drastically different than it was. So it's hard to look back and say my perspective on this is completely different because the reference points are different. It's so much different now. The things I've learned maybe for myself are I took every single loss very, very personally when I first started. I was sure that I had done something wrong to either make us come out flat or didn't have the lines right or didn't make the right matchups decisions, and I carried every one of them, and that was too much. Like, it was a really, really challenging for me to enjoy my job, and I don't think I did for 4 or 5 years, truly. And now I have such a strong appreciation for the gift that it is to be coaching in the NHL, what it means to stand behind the bench during the National Hockey League or during the national anthems at the start of the game. Like that really impacts me. Some of that's, comes from my time in Russia where you're standing behind the bench, you don't know the words to the national anthem, and you're going, well, what am I doing here? Am I ever getting out? And then to get back in the NHL, and it's almost like the further I go, the less I see the game sometimes as a coach, and the more I see the game as a fan, where I get to separate myself a little bit and truly enjoy the athletes and enjoy the relationship the fans have with their players. So I've got a far better appreciation for a lot more of the fun parts of the game now, where I didn't allow myself early on to do that.
Nikolai Volkov once taught me the words to the Russian national anthem, but that's neither here nor there.
You and I learned from the same teacher, yes.
Obviously, and we've mentioned this, is kind of being a trying 12 months for the franchise, and you guys are pretty damn close to coming out the other end in a pretty good spot. How close do you think you are to where you want to be?
A whole lot closer than we would have been if we hadn't suffered the adversity that we've suffered this year. So it was a little bit like some other teams that got some really good young players that put up a lot of points, so you got to pay them. So there's going to be a year of adjustment until you can get it. It's hard to change an entire back end, which is basically what we lost. And then you add the Dustin Byfuglien situation. So we really took a hit there. But the bigger hit was in our injuries. When we got 6 to 8 guys out of our lineup now, seemingly all year. Well, when you take a look at us coming out of the break, we go Boston, St. Louis, Nashville, St. Louis, and we lost 4 going into the break. For me, that was a real tipping point in our season, because what we needed to do, and this sounds cliche, but we truly have to outwork our opponent to give ourselves a chance to win, because we've got a lot of guys from the American League that are in, guys that are in their first year, and it's still a very young team. But all of those hard things, like to be able to wind yourself back up and compete as hard as we need to do to win every night, is exactly what all these young players have to learn to have a chance to win in the playoffs, to become that kind of more veteran team that has a legitimate chance of taking a run in the playoffs. So all of this is a real positive if we handle it just right, if we get a little more consistent. And it's almost like increasing your capacity to work. Like when you're a kid, these kids come in and they're great 1 in 4 games, and you go, oh my God, that kid's skilled, but the other 3 are just ugly as hell, and it's hard to win like that. And then you get a guy at the other end of the spectrum, and for fans in other cities, like a Tavares kind of guy, or for us, it's a Blake Wheeler. It's 1 in 15 that you don't like, and that one you don't even think about because the other 14 are spectacular. So that's the progression we're trying to get with all of these young players, especially up front, to become more consistent and be a harder player every night.
We've mentioned the name a couple times, but do you think getting a resolution to the Dustin Byfuglien situation can help this team?
I think it'll be more from management side, from the players. Everybody in the room loves Buff, but they've truly moved on. It's not like he's hanging around the rink and we're watching him skate every day, wondering if he's coming back. He's off our radar now. So only in terms of what that extra cap space might mean to what management would be able to do either at the end of this year or going into the summer. That's a pretty big piece, right? Your highest paid defenseman is gone for the year, but you don't get to use any of that. Having another guy come in you're not going to add another Dustin Byfuglien to your lineup, but you're going to add a pretty darn good player or 2 that will make you a more solid team.
Paul, obviously you have the info on Dustin and Cheveldayoff and Mark Chipman. You guys know the deal, and I think publicly you guys have been very respectful throughout this whole thing.
Yeah.
The reality, though, is you have a lot of fans who love your team, don't have the info, and are pissed. And they're angry at Dustin. At any point here, were you angry at Dustin?
We're in a real tough spot because of the situation that presented itself. That's just a fact. And it's been hardest on management to try to be able to work through because we lost those other 3 defensemen and this got stacked up. We had a real hole on our back end, and God, we've been injured back there enough to make it worse. But the other piece to that is if you know this guy, you truly love him. So I met with him about 4 days after the start of camp, and I've said this publicly, like he was at peace. You know what I mean? So when you love the guy and he was happy with his decision. Now, I didn't know what that meant 3 weeks from from that point. I mean, he could have walked back in the door at any point in time and say, hey, I want to go and I want to play.
Right.
And I wouldn't have been surprised by that. But the other thing would be, if he never, ever puts the skates on again, that won't surprise me either. And there is the human side to this. Yeah, from a hockey team point of view, it's been tough. But the human side of this guy gave us a lot. He's a big personality, a big-hearted guy. So first and foremost, I just want what's best for him. And if that means he's not being a hockey player ever again, we're all fine with it.
Right.
Paul, as usual, you've handled that situation remarkably well, and everyone around the league has a lot of respect for what you guys have pulled off this year and continue to pull off. So,
without a doubt,
just from an outsider looking in, congrats on what you guys have accomplished so far. I know there's more you want to accomplish.
Yeah.
I know that.
Right.
But it's been a hell of a year, and congrats on staying in the fight, the extension, and all of the above. And we appreciate the time, Paul. Thank you.
Yeah, anytime, and thanks for having me, and I appreciate the kind words. Thank you very much.